Thank you all so much for listening. This show has grown so much over the last year and a half. It keeps doubling in size. Now episodes are downloaded in over 60 countries around the world. Absolutely amazing. And one of the best ways that you guys can help this show is to write reviews. And I know it's a pain, right? But if you go on to Apple Podcasts, Library, Six Ranch Podcasts, you scroll down to the bottom, then you can rate the show and you can add a review. And for the next month, I'm going to look at all the new reviews that go in there, and I'm going to randomly pick one of you guys, and I'm going to send you a Sig Sauer Kilo 2400 ABS rangefinder. You can look it up. It's the expensive rangefinder. It's one of the best rangefinders out there, and it's what I use in competitions. It has a weather unit in it. It'll give you a good ballistic hold for anything that you can range, and you can range stuff farther than you can shoot, I promise. Okay, excellent rangefinder, and I want to give one away to one of you who reviews the show in the next month. Starting now, go.
I guess the keys to sharpening are just to make sure that you have a consistent angle on your sharpening. Now, most knives have some type of grind, and then they have a secondary bevel on them, which is the sharpened edge.
Yeah.
Other than the Scandi grinds, no, we're talking about the Mora knives. The Scandi grinds are just pure flat.
Yeah.
Okay. But other than that, most knives have that secondary bevel. So all you want to do is match up that secondary bevel. And now if you mess that up a little bit, it's fine as long as you mess it up consistently.
Okay.
Right? Consistency is the key. You have to keep that angle.
So people obsess about whether it's a 20, a 25, a 27, a 30-degree edge.
Yeah.
But you can shave with a 33-degree edge. You can shave with a 17-degree edge. So you can get it very, very sharp. But you're talking about making sure that whatever angle you are using, that you're extremely consistent
with that.
These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. The Six Ranch Podcast is brought to you by Sig Sauer. SIG is a leading provider and manufacturer of firearms, electro-optics, ammunition, air guns, and suppressors. For over 250 years, Sig Sauer Inc. has evolved and thrived by blending American ingenuity, German engineering, and Swiss precision. Today, Sig Sauer is synonymous with industry-leading quality and innovation, which has made it the brand of choice amongst the U.S. military, the global defense community, law enforcement, competitive shooters, hunters, and responsible citizens. Sig Sauer is also a premier provider of elite firearms instruction and tactical training at the Sig Sauer Academy located in New Hampshire. For more information about Sig Sauer and its complete line of products, visit sigsauer.com. Mike Rowley, if somebody wants to build a knife at home, what are the bare essentials that they need to turn a piece of metal into something they can cut something else with?
Honestly, a rock. Oh, you're talking a knife that you can use, not a prison shiv or something.
Yeah, okay. Something that you're not going to be embarrassed about.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, I started, I started forging with a coal forge that I made out of a brake drum. I started with some files and a hammer that I bought for $14, brand new, right? And a piece of railroad track that I may or may not have gotten legally. Okay. And that's what I started on. And I could turn out knives. Of course, they're not, collector's quality or anything, but my dad's still using them. My brother's still using them. I still have one that's, perfectly usable, stay sharp. And maybe some canola oil for quenching, something,
okay.
but that's about it. And then, of course, things get better as you upgrade equipment and gear. But I keep telling, the kids who come over, do not be afraid to get started.
Yeah.
That's what you have to do. You just have to start making knives. And you don't have to have my big grinders and all that. I didn't. So, learn.
Sure. So, a piece of railroad track, that's a fairly good anvil, right?
It's not bad because it's already been hardened, and especially if you get them, the trains have driven on them. I mean, they've had tons of stuff driven over them for a long time, and you cut that so they're already work hardened. The edges aren't hard, so by that I mean like sharp 45.
Yeah,
because you don't want that in your anvils, even maybe on a small section. But most of us round some of the corners on our anvils off anyway, so it's already done. The only downside to the railroad track is it just doesn't have a super wide surface to work on.
Sure.
But I forged on that for probably the first, 3 or 4 years while I was looking for the anvil.
Yeah.
And that dang Forged in Fire came out, and everybody wanted $10,000 for their anvils after that because everyone was starting to forge about that same time.
Right.
And so I finally waited until I got what I wanted within a doable price range. You didn't have to sell a kidney or anything for it. But
how long have you been making knives?
Well, honestly, that's kind of a trick question. How long have I been forging and making knives? Recently, about 8 years. I was coaching football, and I got out of that, and I needed something to fill my time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started forging, and I read everything that I could. But before that, I used to read the blacksmithing books, trapper books, Mountain Man, Louis L'Amour, all of that. And I remember reading a story about Jim Bowie and his blacksmith making the original Bowie knife out of this meteorite, super awesome metal that fell from the sky. And that's a myth, by the way. I've since then made stuff with meteorite, and it's not super awesome, but and it's super expensive. So, but anyway, but that just lit the fire, and so I still have the very first knife that I made, and it is terrible. And I made it when I was about 8, and you laugh, but it is like way terrible. It like has a piece of pine handle on it, and some rivets that my dad had, but he only had one in a rivet gun, so I didn't have enough for the rest. So anyway, it is bad, and it is embarrassing, but I keep it because, that's where I started. So long story short, I started back then, start, but I didn't know anything. And then recently, within the 8 years, then now you have, YouTube and stuff that we didn't have back then. So that's when it really took off, when I had the resources and the information. So
yeah. And this fire and steel, it sounds like it's been in your blood forever. Like,
oh man, I love it. Yeah. And I mean, who doesn't, I'm like 400 years old now. No, what am I? 53. And so I remember I was in high school when Conan the Barbarian came out, and the riddle of steel and the giants. And I'm just, man, who did not want to be Arnold? Who did not want to be Conan the Barbarian, And the funny thing is I'd read all the books before that, by Edgar Rice Burroughs and the Tarzan books, and then the Conan books, and then I can't remember the author's name now. Anyway, all of them, and then the movie came out, and it's all about the steel, and anyway, that just fired me up. I wanted swords and knives and all that stuff.
Well, it's a really provocative thing, and people love forging. They like watching it. They like thinking about it. It's an exciting thing to take a piece of metal and then turn it into something useful. And that's been a huge part of how humans have progressed. Like,
absolutely.
Going from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age was incredible. Like, that was the giant leap for us, was going from rocks to metal.
Yeah.
And of course, the first knives ever were 2.5 million years old or whatever, and they're made out of rock. But we've needed to cut stuff for a really long time. I was doing some research on cutting tools a while ago, and I found it interesting that we were cutting meat with knives for a long time before we ever figured out how to use fire.
Oh, right. Oh, I didn't know. Yeah, that's interesting.
Today, fire and steel go together.
Right.
But knives came first. It wasn't steel,
Right.
but knives came first.
Right.
It was the more important tool. And then
Sure.
once we could combine those two things, that's where we really
Sure.
started to move forward. And I feel like a lot of ways knife making has progressed a lot, and in some ways it hasn't. In a lot of
Sure.
ways, knife making has been the same for a very long time. And tell me about like the Damascus that you make now. Like, how different is that from the Damascus that would have been made in Syria 2,000 years ago?
Right. Well, we've done some, and I've done a smelt where you try to make that or copy that, which is it's called bloom steel now, is what we call it in the West, is the Damascus that they made back in Syria. We don't have all the metals, the same exact metals and things that they did then, but that was a homogeneous piece of steel.
Okay.
So even though it still had, dendrites and some other stuff in it that left a pattern, it was beautiful. Then we kind of moved to the folded steel like the Japanese did. And they would take that bloom and forge it out and fold it and forge it. And all that did is get all the impurities out. But that left a beautiful Damascus pattern. And then more recently, what we do is it's called pattern welded. And if you ever, post anything online, the warriors, the internet warriors, come in and correct you like, oh, this is my new Damascus. And they're like, that's not true Damascus, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's pattern welded. It's been called Damascus since the 1800s in that way. And all we do now is we take two dissimilar pieces of steel or more, but one will have a higher nickel content, for example. The other one will be a simple carbon steel. And so once you forge that out, and then you can manipulate that pattern how you want, you can get all kinds of cool stuff. And they're beautiful. Throw it in some acid. Well, the nickel doesn't get eaten away, and the high carbon just turns totally black. So that reveals the pattern.
Okay.
And so it's kind of evolved, and it's quite a bit different now. But there are still some people making bloom steel and stuff more for nostalgia, I guess, or can I do it? And it is a pain in the rear, though. So,
well, I'm sure that when the Japanese started doing it, they were doing it because it had function.
Sure.
And it is beautiful, but what is the function of having two different types of steel that have been folded, pounded out, folded, pounded out, sometimes hundreds of times?
Right. Now, when we're talking the pattern welded steels, function, nothing.
Yeah.
It's for looks. It's pretty stuff. Now, the Japanese, so what you'd do is you'd have a smelt and you'd put black sand, which had iron in it, and it'd trickle down through the layers of charcoal, and like people wouldn't sleep for 4 days because you're tending the smelt. And as that went down, as the iron went down, then it would pick up carbon from the charcoal.
Okay.
And that's how they got the high carbon steel, right? So in the bottom, then you have this bloom, and it looks like a giant sponge. It's about 2,500 to 2,200 degrees of giant sponge. And you press that out. The only problem is you still have bits of sand and glass and a little bit of charcoal or whatever. And so you have to consolidate all that. And once you do that and forge all that out, then you've got to fold it. And each time you fold, you lose impurities. And so the Japanese, that was their way of making a high carbon steel.
Okay.
And all they were trying to do is get something homogeneous.
Yep.
Well, nowadays we have, all the modern technologies, and, they'll melt the steel with electricity in an oxygen-free environment, and add the mixes and stuff. So then you get leaf springs that are, I hate to say this is like one of those deals where, people be hating on me, but they're far superior to any of the Japanese steels that they had.
Okay.
There's not the romance. It's not as beautiful. It's not as traditional. And I love the process of the traditional Japanese swords. I mean, I would love to have one, and I've made one or two. But honestly, give me a modern day steel.
Yeah.
And I'd take it into battle way before I ever would, some of the old Japanese stuff. So,
well, the battles that I have to fight these days are, against an elk or a deer or a bear
Sure.
that's laying on the ground. And
they're tough, man.
yeah, I've got a couple knives here that I use a lot, and one of them is the Benchmade Bug Out. It says 535 on it, and it's S30V.
Okay.
And then I've got the carbon knife from Rowley, and it says S35VN. So
okay.
Looking at these two knives, what can you tell me about kind of the difference in quality between one blade and another, and sort of the shape and like?
Sure.
They're similar in a lot of ways, but they've got some differences.
Yeah, they are very similar. Your Benchmade with your S30V, that is a new modern super steel. So it's stainless, it has a good resistance qualities there, and it's got really good hardenability and wear resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's those three things that you really want to look for in a knife or a knife blade. And then the other thing is toughness.
Okay.
Right, like a leaf spring is a 5160, which means it has 0.06% carbon in it.
Okay.
Okay. This would have significantly higher carbon.
Okay.
Which means that it would harden more.
Okay.
Okay. And but it may not be as tough.
Yep.
Right. Okay. But you're not using this as a pry bar.
No.
You're not using it as a spring on a truck. You're actually using it as a knife is meant to be, right? And
most of the time.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of using knives for things that knives shouldn't be used for. Yeah. I'm first to admit.
I have about 20 old timers from when I was a kid trying to use them as screwdrivers and stuff, and tips are broken off. And yeah, I get that. But no, this is a new steel or new-ish, in the history of mankind. How's that? But it's a super steel, or what would be considered that. It takes special heat treating equipment and things like that, which is why most knife makers don't do that. Don't use these steels. The shape of these both are nice. Your Benchmade, though, I really like that because it's got the drop down, which is like a drop point hunter.
Yeah.
Right. And so that tip's in the middle, which means you can use it as like a survival knife if you need to drill a hole in something. Mm-hmm. Use that tip. But it's nice for skinning too because it's not, it's not up. You're not going to catch into the meat or the hide and cut through. No, this is my favorite shape.
Okay.
Favorite shape of knife. It's a clip point, so if you're stabbing stuff, you can stab. I don't know what you'd stab, but
yeah, cheesecake.
Cheesecake, yeah. Cut your cheesecake and open your packages. That's the real deal nowadays.
It is.
Mark of a modern man. But your other knife here is basically the same steel.
And this is the Rowley.
Yeah, the Rowley. And I don't know. Usually a knife steel, say, for example, 5160, and I'm more familiar with high carbon steel.
Yeah. Okay,
so it'll still patina and rust and stuff like that. But 5160 is usually a leaf spring steel with a 0.06, and then you get like 1080, 1075, and that's like you're getting into like plowshares and stuff like that, and it has just a little bit more carbon.
Yeah.
Then you get into like a steel one that's pretty popular is 1095. Or 52-100, and that has almost 1% carbon. Okay, and that's a lot more carbon. Double. Yeah, and that's what you would use, say, for razors. Yeah, that's what I use for kitchen knives, just because of the high carbon. Mm-hmm. Right, if I have a really thin edge, I want it extremely hard.
The Benchmade is S30, and the Rowley is S35. So what does that number mean? Okay, so the S is just stainless. Okay, right, and then the V or VN in the back are the additives that they would have, and
right?
V is vanadium.
Vanadium, and then N is nitrogen. Okay. And so somewhere in that process they've introduced some vanadium and nitrogen. Now, vanadium helps wear resistance. And hardenability, and you want that in a stainless steel. Mm-hmm. Okay, because I don't know if you remember, but when they first came out with stainless chef's knives, they wouldn't hold an edge. And you go to any thrift store now, and there's like drawers full of them, you know, and they're just cheap. I mean, they're like pieces of tin, really. Mm-hmm. Well, you start adding these other elements, and that adds a certain amount of hardenability, durability, and then wear resistance. And so now the 30 and 35, those are just markers for how much of each they put in there. And I don't know exactly what these are. I mean, I knew at one time. I just don't remember honestly what these are. And there's others too. There's tons of new steel. I use a steel, let's call AEBL, which is a stainless. Mm-hmm. And then I use a Nitro V, which is AEBL with vanadium added to it.
Yeah.
And so I'm most familiar with those steels, and then the high carbon, just because I use them a lot and they're accessible.
And what we were talking about earlier today is, as everybody listens to this show, they probably can't wait for me to stop talking about the fact that I'm going moose hunting this year. But I'm going moose hunting this year, and there are some absolutely magnum brown bears around.
Sure.
So as soon as this moose hits the dirt, there is a clock that starts ticking on how long before a bear shows up. And one of the tools that I've used in the past is both axes and hatchets for skinning, gutting, quartering, fleshing. Mm-hmm. And in a really good axe, you can break down an animal with incredible speed, as fast as anything. Sure. And when I was in Africa, that's what we used too, is axes for quartering, for all kinds of that stuff to get critters out of the field. Same deal. Right. We've got leopards, we've got lions. There's stuff out there that you don't want to show up.
Yeah.
And we're going to be using leaf spring for that project. So tell me a little bit more about how we're going to build out this hatchet.
Okay. Well, we're going to, as you and I have visited, first of all, I'm jealous of your moose hunt. Okay. I'm so out of shape, you'd have to helicopter me in or something. And then, but no, I always wanted to hunt a moose, just never have yet. Okay. That's the key, yet. Right. But no, the hatchet, what we're going to do is we're going to have a kind of like a bearded Viking axe thing where it drops down. So the front of it's going to be a curve, not a traditional hatchet. I mean, you still use it to cut down a tree if you wanted, if you had enough patience, I guess. But but the curve then is going to be more like an ulu knife, so you can just get right in there. And and I assume anyway, plenty of people in Alaska have hunted moose and done that same thing with their ulus and axes and hatchets. And so one of the good things, I guess, with the high carbon steel, okay, so like the 5160, is that it is extremely tough. Okay, it's meant to be springy. It's meant to be tough. Now, when we're talking about tough, that doesn't mean edge retention. It's not talking about sharpness. It's not talking right. It just means that it's able to take shock. It's able to take. I mean, you can do anything you want with it.
Yep.
Right. You can take a rock and pound on the back of it to get the edge through a pelvis or whatever you want to do, and it's not going to harm it. You're not going to break it, which is a positive. The other positive thing is once we get that sharp, it is easy to sharpen in the field.
Okay.
Okay. Now, some of these super steels, you can get them kind of sharp in the field, right? I mean, you can. But you really need like a diamond stone, or you need I can't remember the little sticks, with diamonds there, or something along those lines.
Something extremely hard.
Yeah. You're not, and if you lose that, you're screwed, right? Yeah. You're not going to be able to sharpen those two knives as sharp as you will want. But with the high carbon, you can sharpen. Yeah. Well, with a rock, out of the river or whatever, and get that sharp again. And then the other thing too is with that hatchet, we're going to do a convex grind. Okay. Which is it ends up looking like an apple seed.
Okay.
Right. You have a hollow grind, you have a flat grind, and most of my knives, I do a flat grind. Mm-hmm. Right. I like that. There's no resistance once you cut, get through that first little bit. Hollow grind is fine for kitchen stuff, but a straight razor or something like that. Way too fine for what you would be doing up there. But that apple seed, slight apple seed, right? I don't want to make it, too thick.
Right.
But then once we do that, we'll put that secondary bevel on. So that will add sharpenability, toughness. I mean, basically you'll be able to do it all.
So I want to talk about toughness and deviate away from this hatchet thing a little bit.
Sure.
And is hatchet even the right word for what we're building? Or is this like a
Yeah.
short-handled axe?
Yeah, it would be more, I guess the term for it would probably be like a hand axe.
Okay.
In Scandinavia, they use those a lot for carving, for processing, wood stuff, really fine carving stuff, and other really fine tasks like that. And they use that axe for that, right?
Yeah.
And so it would probably be a hand axe.
Okay. So toughness. You've been on the show Forged in Fire a couple times, and man, oh man, did they do some mean things to the steel that you guys forged in that show. So
Yeah.
tell me about the first time you were on that show for the people who haven't seen it.
Okay, so it was season 5, episode 38, I think, if I remember right. It's the pipe tomahawk episode.
Episode 38. They
Yeah.
crank out a lot of episodes.
Yeah, and see, the first 3-4 years, they were only, they were running 10 to 15 episodes a year, a season. And then that one, man, they just jumped it up. And, it became super popular. I think it was around season 3, 4. It really caught steam and just started rolling. And so that's when they started, adding the extra episodes, and because people are watching it and people are, hey, when's the next one going to be on? We can't wait all summer. So they would film, a bunch of them. Anyway, long story short, I get there and they do the reveal as they always do. And, I pull out 5 pads of steel wool. And I'm like, wait a minute here. Usually you take a spark and spark it into steel wool to start a
steel
fire.
wool catches on fire really well.
Yeah, if I just threw that in the forge, it'd just like burn up.
Yeah.
And so we all had to do a canister weld, which is just a piece of square tubing. You just pack that down in, and then you put steel powder in it.
Okay.
And the powder that you add is really fine. I mean, it doesn't really show it on the show, but it's fine like a like baby powder, almost like talc powder. I mean, it is really fine. So you tap and make sure all those voids from the steel wool are filled as best you can, and then weld it all up, because you can't have any flame in there, or the steel wool will catch on fire, or the powder will just shoot out like a sparkler.
Right.
And then you throw it in the forge. And I ended up making, I think it was a 10-inch blade with a 5-inch handle and a gut hook.
Okay.
I had to have a gut hook in it.
Okay.
And anyway, I got that done, and it was awesome. But we did an antler chop.
Okay.
And anyway, that's like, you don't do that with your knives.
No.
I mean, some people might.
No, you don't stab it into a piece of wood and jump up and down on it like it's a diving board. You don't try and chop antlers with your knife. That's mean.
Yeah. No, I cut stuff with my knives, and then you can do that. But I grind mine, like I said, a flat grind, and really fine. And so my knife, it did take some damage just because my edge was so fine. But it was sharp the whole time, because I got it sharp, which is nice. But that Appleseed grind, a lot of guys on that show will do that convex grind, with that, where it's beefy. I mean, it is like a thick knife. I'm like, I don't want to carry a leaf spring out there, and I don't want to be swinging a leaf spring. Just not my philosophy, really. I want a small, fine knife that cuts, But anyway, so I had to kind of adjust my mindset, but anyway, they're just brutal on there, stabbing stuff into steel cans and trying to bend it, and it's crazy. But once I won those first 2 rounds, I was lucky enough to come home and actually come here back to Wallowa County, and they came to the forge here, and they sent a little film crew, 2 people, and we had 5 days to do that, and the first day was 5-hour days. 5-hour forging day.
Okay.
And then you had 10 hours per day after that to forge, right? And finish your weapons. And the reveal that we got were a matching set of pipe tomahawks.
What is a pipe tomahawk?
Okay, so basically originated with the eastern tribes back east. And what it is, it's a fully functional tomahawk, but you can smoke it too. So it's got a bowl on the back to smoke.
Okay.
And people were saying, teasing us because we're in Oregon and just had legalized marijuana here. And, the film crew's like, kind of inside joke. And anyway, but that's not the purpose, okay? The purpose is it's symbolic in that if I respond to you and I hand you my pipe tomahawk, if I hand you the pipe tomahawk blade up, that means, I don't agree with you. You and I are going to war. We got an issue, right? But if we have the peace pipe, basically the pipe up, and we're smoking it together, right? Just tobacco or, or whatever they smoked back then. Anyway, that would be symbolic of peace and friendship. And that would tie our tribes or our people together.
And that's a really beautiful thing, to have a tool that is either a weapon of war or a symbol of peace.
Oh, absolutely.
That's functional for both.
Yeah, and everything else, right? You're talking about going and hunting, or with your moose hunting processing game. They use the tomahawks for that. Mm-hmm. They use tomahawks, chop the wood, and whatever, and war and peace. But it just represented life in general, to all of them. And so, that was cool. That was very cool. And I tried to get all fancy, do Damascus or pattern welded steel like we're talking, but that tore out. So I ended up using the technique that they would have used back then, and that's you wrap steel around and then forge weld it together, so you have a wrapped eye where the handle goes.
Okay.
And anyway, I happened to use Farrier's rasp because I like the little fish pattern that it leaves on there, and anyway, I thought maybe that'll be closer to the original.
Yeah.
And then put the pipe part on the back, and I had made, I don't know why, but it was in one of my buckskinning books back when I was maybe 20, 22, 23, right around there. I had read about a peace pipe that had design cuts out all in the middle. And so you smoked it, the bowl was in the middle, and the mouthpiece was at the back, is all lined up in the middle, but there were sections missing all through that peace pipe. I'm like, how in the heck did they do that? Well, they cut it apart and then carved out a channel around the outside and then glued that wood back on.
Okay.
Right. So it looks like, oh my gosh, and then the natives had decorated that all up and stuff. And I was like, so anyway, I had a little experience with making one of those. And so I did kind of that same technique where I, split the handle, carved it out, and then I did some other stuff. And then I had made some longbows too in the past with like mountain mahogany and Osage orange and stuff. And so I used a technique on, with coloring them and kind of camouflaging them on the tomahawks too. It turned out okay, but anyway, definitely under a time rush, but it was a fantastic experience.
And then how did they test your tomahawks once you got them made?
Well, that was cool and disappointing. Okay. The cool part was they threw them.
Yep.
And they threw them into wood block, and then they tested to make sure the handles don't come loose. Make sure. Now, the trick with pipe tomahawks, like normally a tomahawk, the handle's thinner where you hold the hand, and it's just friction fit on there. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's the way that a lot of the natives made them. So if the handle broke, it was easy just to knock that handle off, carve another stick that tapered, and then just put that back on, right?
Yep.
It was an easy fix. But you can't do that with pipe tomahawks because you have to have all the holes lined up for smoking and stuff, right? So they checked the heads to make sure that they weren't loose and all that. And so that was pretty cool to see Dave Baker with his giant curly mustaches and his vest on and all dapper. And he's throwing tomahawks into this chunk of wood, over there. And that's cool. I think he threw it 6 times. And I think both of ours stuck all 6 times. I mean, it was like, head-to-head competition. And then the other test is they had to be functional. And so the judges had to smoke them.
Okay.
And let's see, who was it? Doug Markida, it will kill, and Will Willis, right? The host. They smoked mine.
Okay.
And And that was hilarious because Doug Marcaida had just about died. He started choking. And I don't know. Anyway, I'm like, dude, you don't have to really inhale. You just have to pull the smoke from the bowl over, And but anyway, that was the good part. The bad part was I made those things like American hickory, and reinforced handle, and I mean, he could have cut a train car in half with those tomahawks.
Yeah,
I overbuilt those. I was ready, but they didn't test them on that.
Gotcha.
I'm like, dude, chop through a horse skull or something. And, I wanted a ballistic dummy test, or something. But what they did is, or the other test that they did that I thought was pretty cool, is they brought in some dummies dressed in British redcoats.
Okay.
And so they took the tomahawks, or Doug Marcaida took one in each hand, and then went at the dummies, with the redcoats gear on them, kind of like in The Patriot, the movie The Patriot. And
Mel Gibson going all nuts.
Oh yeah, man.
Yeah,
I love that show. I was just like, Mel, man, I want to be the Patriot. Anyway, so that was cool, and the other test is too. Wow, I forgot about all this stuff. Holy smokes! They did a pig test.
Oh,
so they chopped a pig carcass.
Okay.
With the tomahawks, and I'm here to tell you, man, that's the real deal. I mean, as far as weapons of war, you do not want to be on the receiving end of one of those things.
It's a powerful tool,
and gosh.
I've got, like we were talking about before, and not naming names, but I've got friends in the special forces that use these things, and you've used them a lot in the last 20 years.
Right.
It's a powerful tool.
Oh my gosh.
And not just for against people, but for all kinds of things. If you have to breach through a vehicle or through a door, like, it's just a good tool to have.
Yeah. These would have no problem punching through like a modern day car door.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it wouldn't even slow them down really, till it hit wood. I mean, I was surprised because Doug hit the ribs and stuff, and I'm like, oh, well, pretty much anything will go through rib meat, it's not that big a deal. Then he chopped into the head and the backbone and severed the backbone. I mean, this is a big hog, like it was way bigger than any person.
Yeah.
And it didn't even slow it down. I'm like,
cool.
Oh man. Yeah.
So are those judges the real deal?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
They are. The thing is not every, kind of a disclaimer. Not everyone is an expert in every field, right?
You can't.
You can't be. No one is. But as all-around experts in what they do, all of those guys are, they're good.
Yeah.
I mean, they really are.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Have that credibility and validity.
And, for example, David Baker, he makes all the weapons for every episode. Right.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so he makes all the weapons just like you see on the show. They test them to make sure that they'll pass the test or can pass the test.
Okay.
Because they don't want to have something that's just like complete failure every time, right? What kind of television is that?
Right.
And, but he'll still push the weapons. But he does all of that. Jay Nielsen's a master smith. Jason Knight, who was on the show for a few seasons, he's a master smith in the American Bladesmith Society. Both of them are. Ben Abbott's won every episode he's ever competed in, including beat the judges. He's the only judge who won every episode.
Wow.
And I mean, he is phenomenal. And, Doug Marcaida is a Filipino martial artist, and I think the only thing that I saw that I would be like, oh, Doug, he's not really an expert in that, is they had one season where they made bows. Okay. So they had to make a bow with the steel limbs, and you could tell like Doug may not have had the proper archery form there,
And you're a bow hunter.
Yeah. And I shot.
It's easy for you to be critical of that because you know what it should look like.
Right. Yeah. And I shot traditional. I mean, that's what I did for a lot of years before I had to put my training wheels back on my bow because I was getting old. But
I love compounds, man. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I do.
I'll shoot anything. I don't care. Whatever makes you happy. But I really encourage people to be as lethal as possible.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So
and there's no doubt. I mean, you're 300 plus feet per second with the compound, and you're lucky to get 200 out of your recurves, and but again, what started me on this whole path to making my own stuff, including knives, was, I read books like on Howard Hill, shooting a 70-pound longbow and first white man to kill an elephant with a bow and, all that stuff. And I read his books, and I think he shot an elk at 370, 390 yards or something like that. Took him 3 shots.
Incredible.
Yeah. I mean, he's in 2x4s out at 80 yards with a longbow, no sights, no. I mean, like, I can't do that, but I thought it was cool.
Right.
But then you get compounds and you're like, holy smokes, yeah. I think if the Native Americans had compounds, a lot of the conflicts would have turned out differently.
Yeah, maybe.
Holy smokes, man.
Maybe. I don't know. I think about that a lot, especially for the Civil War. I'm 100% convinced that the longbow was still the better tool than the musket at that time.
Oh, yeah.
It had greater accuracy. You could reload faster. You could shoot farther.
Right.
The curve for learning was a lot shallower as well. You can
right.
teach somebody to shoot this longbow really quickly. Whereas a musket, there's a lot of failure that goes on. It's slow to reload. Right. Accuracy sucks. But the big advantage is that a musket's loud.
Yeah.
And you cannot underestimate the impact of noise on the battlefield.
Sure.
And we saw that in Afghanistan with the tanks. As soon as you shot the main gun of the tank, you could stop the fight just with the sound of that. It wasn't the impact of that shell somewhere. You could turn around and shoot the hillside. But it is so loud that everybody's like, I'm done. That's enough. I'm a farmer again now. Don't want to play this game. So, that the longbow is such an interesting and powerful tool and doesn't require any maintenance for the most part. Yeah.
Well, and the cool thing is, it would have employed a lot of blacksmiths too. Maybe not as many as guns, but somebody has to make the arrowheads.
Sure.
You have to forge those arrowheads.
Making all those points for sure.
And unlike some of the Hollywood movies, you don't pour steel out to make an arrowhead or to make a sword. You don't do that. It's completely false.
You're talking Game of Thrones stuff now.
Yeah. And even like Conan, quench a sword in snow. No, whatever. Yeah, there was another, Robin Hood, they're making the arrow points for the, and they carve an arrowhead shape out of a log and pour, this metal in it. Well, it has to be lead because that's the only thing with that low of melting point, I mean, it's Hollywood, and it was great. I loved the movie. It's so romantic and all that stuff. And Kevin Costner's my boy. But man, that is just, no, it's not real. It's fake,
Yeah.
Oh, and Lord of the Rings, I'm sorry, you don't break Narsil and just forge it back together like they did.
Yeah.
Okay, even if you're a magic elf superstar and you're good looking as Legolas, it's just... Yeah. That's false too.
Okay, so you got a sword that's broken into a bunch of pieces. How do you turn it back into a sword again?
The only way to do that is you cut it up into pieces, restack it like the Japanese did with their small little pieces of tomahawk, and then you forge it all back together. You have to make that homogeneous,
Yeah.
If you did it just like they did and just kind of overlapped, that's called a lap weld.
Yeah.
I mean, that's extremely weak, You can do it with chain or something like that, but you're not going to do it with a sword. The sword, you actually hit something, and the shock of that moving down that blade is phenomenal.
Right.
If you watch these things in slow motion, you'll watch a Japanese swordsman, chopping mats or something like that. Anything that's a little bit harder gives a little resistance. Watch that in slow mo, and those things are just wow, bowing. It's like, it's awesome. But they're, that shock is moving all the way through there. And anyway,
that's why something like spring steel that can handle some of that shock and movement makes it stronger than something that's really stiff and brittle that's going to fall to pieces.
And see, I would take that like we're talking about with a samurai sword. I mean, I've seen, okay, here's the deal. I love samurai swords, right? I made them. I've read everything I could on them, and I'm not a master swordsmith, okay? No, don't even pretend to be or anything. But one of the things that drives me crazy is all this romanticism about they're the best swords in the world, and they're better than European swords, and they're not, okay? They cut through gun barrels. No, they can't.
Yeah.
They've never been able to do that. That's our troops, or back in World War I and II, where our commanders are telling the troops that, so they're scared to death when somebody's running at them with a sword, so they shoot them before they can get to them, right? Because, the samurai swords are deadly, very deadly, but they're made for one purpose, and that's cut human flesh.
Yeah.
Right? And there's no magic or mystery, but, and they bend all the time, right? They bend and then they hammer them back straight and go back to battle.
Yeah.
But you take a leaf spring, it's not going to bend. It's going to spring back, and a lot of the European swords can cut the tatami mats just as well as samurai swords. And, I still love the romantic nature of samurai swords. I have one. I have a few of them, actually. One of these days when I sell about 10 million more knives, I'll actually buy like an antique or, something, an original. But, anyway, they're awesome, but they're not.
That groove that they put in the samurai sword, like a blood groove or whatever.
Right.
Does that have a functional purpose, or is that about redistributing weight, or what's the deal with that?
Yes, it does have a purpose, and it's not to bleed.
Yeah.
Right. Although that's kind of what, people have said. And you see that on like European Viking swords too. You'll have that, you'll have that hollow grind in the middle. Mm-hmm. It's called a fuller. Okay. But what the fullers do is it lightens a sword, right? And most swords, you're talking 2 or 3 pounds.
Yeah.
Right. Most reproductions of most American-made swords are way overbuilt, so they're super heavy.
Yeah.
But if you're going to battle, you have a 6-pound sword out there. Well, the first couple guys you come in contact with, they're going to have a hard time with you.
Yeah.
Right. Because you just have a weight advantage.
Right.
But then when you can't hold up your arms after you're done with those two, you're dead. I mean, literally, you have to be able to keep fighting. You have to be able to. And so that fuller, that does lighten it. But the other function is it acts kind of like an I-beam.
Okay.
Okay, so it adds strength. Well, it reduces weight without sacrificing strength.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Just by increasing the surface area a little bit?
Yeah, and then you've got the just like an I-beam, and the physics of it is you have a thin piece in the middle with a thicker piece and a plate on top and bottom. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, kind of like a railroad track.
Yeah.
Right. What that does is you can't compress that this way.
Okay.
Okay, but it's flexible this way.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden now you've got strength this way more than you would just say a straight piece of steel.
Yeah.
But then it's got the flexibility too, and so a lot of the European swords had that later on, and some of the Viking stuff too. Although a lot of the Viking stuff, like the Ulfbert swords, they had, instead of a narrow fuller, they had like almost the full length of the sword. Mm. So it was true like an I-beam almost, okay. Right?
Gotcha.
And but anyway, yeah, phenomenal stuff.
For people who are going out to buy a knife, like buy a factory knife, they're going down to a shop or something like that.
Sure.
Going down to Sportsman's Warehouse, they're going to buy a knife.
Right.
What do they look for? Because it's overwhelming. There's a case. It's beautiful. It's set out like jewelry. They're just glistening. Oh, yeah. There's so many of them. Like, what are features that you look for in a knife if you're going to go out and buy one?
If I'm buying a knife there, and that's one of the reasons why I got into knife making. I go into places like that and look and be like, oh, just drool. I mean, that's like a guy's dream, right? You go in there and you're like, this is better than Christmas. And you're like, I want that one and that one, that one. Well, some of the higher end I couldn't afford. So I thought, well, I better start making them so I can have them, But for me, I know what I like based on what I've used in the past. I know I don't want some giant Bowie knife for elk hunting. I'm just not going to use it. It's awkward. I'm probably going to end up cutting my own leg off by accident or something stupid, right? So I want a drop point hunter or a clip point, skinning knife, something along those lines. So I kind of have an idea of what I want for what I'm using it, for the purpose, right? First going in. And then I'm also going to look at brand names. Mm-hmm. So, if it's me and I'm buying my first knife, I want to do a little research, I guess is what I'm saying, into, if I want a nice knife, I'm going to try to get something that's like a Benchmade or a buck knife or an old, a Schrade or something, because they've been around and you kind of know some of the quality there.
You've got a company that's going to take care of you if something happens.
Right. Yep. You have that background. But then when you get into more custom knives, to be honest with you, you either have to know the maker or it can kind of be a crapshoot.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, to be honest. And usually you'll be fine. Like, if it's a custom knife, it's by a custom maker, even if it's a local yokel.
Yeah.
Right. They're going to do the heat treat right. They're going to get you a good knife and they're going to stand by it. The only ones that I would really stay away from, once you look at function of the knife, if I'm just fishing or hunting birds, then I just want a small bird and trout knife, that kind of thing, or whatever. And then I look at makers, and if I don't know makers, then again, it's just kind of a guess. But stay away from any of the cheapo made knives or imported knives.
Kind of dangerous.
Very. Yeah, very. And some of them are great. I mean, honestly, like I've got one, I think, that's a folding knife I bought on a trip because I had to repair a car. It was like $10. I can't even remember the brand or whatever. I still have it and use it all the time.
Yeah. People
laugh at me because they're like, "You're a knife maker. Why are you using it?" Made in China or something. And it was good. But I've had them too where, you can't keep them sharp. The blade breaks, come flying out of there. I've cut my hands on them and stuff because the blade, like, literally has come out of the handle kind of thing, The only caveat I would say there, well, two things. Don't buy Damascus that's cheap. If you want real Damascus, it's going to cost you. Mm-hmm. Right? So Damascus knives that are $50, don't buy them.
Okay.
Or, unless you want to look at them, right? Because they're pretty. Yeah. But usually they're made in Wazirabad in Pakistan, right? And they're made out of like car doors, refrigerator doors, tin cans, whatever
they can find,
whatever steel they have, and they'll tell you it's a D2 or some other, like, 1095 and 15 and 20, just all the makers are using, right? They'll tell you that, but then they just don't, and they delaminate and they don't hold an edge, and I've seen guys like run them through their paces and literally take one of their knives and cut one of the Damascus knives clear in half with their own knife, right? Kind of thing. But the caveat, I would say, the Mora knives from Sweden.
We talked about this earlier. Tremendous knife for super
Absolutely.
cheap. Yeah.
I've got probably 4 or 5 of them, and that's one knife as far as an import that I would, recommend to anybody. And I bought them for my daughters and my son. We go on camping trips. We have like spoon carving contests. They're perfect for that. And again, they're nice knives. And
$18. Just looked it up.
Oh, did you? Yeah. Right. And and they're plastic molded handles, and the tang only goes like a quarter of the way through or whatever. But I've seen videos of guys just destroying those, batoning through wood and logs and stuff to split wood with those knives, and they held up just fine, and you can get them literally razor sharp.
Yeah. And they show up sharp.
Yes. Yeah, they do. They come sharp. I mean, they're ready to go.
Yeah.
They have a cheap plastic sheath, which locks the blade in, which is fine.
Yeah.
I mean, you can upgrade sheath if you want, by somewhere else, but you don't have to. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's got a hole in the bottom, which I know people are like, don't ever think of that, that kind of thing, and I didn't. Mm-hmm. But the hole in the bottom with a plastic sheath, kind of like maybe even a Kydex, they say it's folded. You don't want any water or moisture puddling in there.
Yep.
And I wouldn't have thought of that. I just, why does it have a hole, but anyway, it seems like they think of everything, and it's got that really nice Scandi grind that's anyway, easy to sharpen, easy to keep sharp. They're not overly thick, that kind of thing. I mean, just.
So let's say we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to our local knife maker.
Sure.
And order a knife.
Mm-hmm.
How should that conversation go?
Well, for me, I just have my experiences, working with other makers and what people have done in the past. And, pretty much they contact me and say, I want a knife, right? And whatever it is. Now that I have quite a few online, on Instagram or whatever, people will say, I want that one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But a lot of times they'll contact me and say, do you have any in stock? Have this coming up, and either I do or I don't. And usually I don't. I'm usually about 2 to 3 months out now on knife making. If it's not a big sword, Damascus set of something, something like that, I'm usually 2 to 3 months out. And if it's a big emergency, my niece is getting married and I have, okay, I'll try to bump it up a little, But if they don't know, if they literally don't know, like my husband's a hunter.
Yeah.
He wants a skinning knife or whatever. I'll say, well, find a picture.
Yeah.
Find what he likes, and then I'll make that for you. Or I'll send them some of what I've made in the past and say, okay, this is what I make. And usually you don't get too many people asking, about steels and stuff like that. And usually I'll try to lead the conversation a little bit as far as handle materials, what you're going to use it for. I think we talked about your hand axe going to, we want to use the micarta on there rather than wood because, it's going to have blood all over it. It's going to, it's going to be in a rough environment where it's going to be hot, cold, hot. You're going to be flying and, all this stuff. And if it's moose, it's around water. You don't want wood on there. I guess is what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
It'll shrink and you'll end up falling off and stuff. But if it's a beautiful kitchen knife that you're going to take good care of and never run it through the dishwasher, then let's put some really figured, nice, beautiful wood on, or if it's Damascus, that kind of thing. So I'll talk through handle materials and stuff with them. And if they want cheap, then, I'll explain machine finishes versus hand finishes and stuff like that. And so,
which I got a set of steak knives for my mom that you built.
Oh yeah.
And there's no greater crime I think that you can commit to a properly cooked steak than using a dull knife on it. And it drives me crazy. You can go to some really nice restaurants. Yeah. And here's a beautiful ribeye steak, and then they give you, basically a metal butter knife. Like, this is a joke. But a good sharp knife makes eating a steak a much better experience.
Sure.
And I love those knives. Those are fantastic.
Thank you.
And they're each one of them is a little bit unique. You can tell that they're made by a man. They're awesome.
Right.
Love those things.
One of the things that I dislike is, people want, or some people are critical of knife makers. Only simply because not everything is precisely exactly the same.
Yeah.
So that said, I made your mom, like you're saying, each one is just a little different. It has its own kind of personality or whatever, own story. And I like that fact though.
I do too.
And they're not like so different. I mean, they're similar, but the differences are small enough that you can tell you didn't just go down to Goodwill and or whatever and pick up a set of random stuff. But I mean, they're all the same, but they're all a little different. And that's what, I don't know, shows an individual maker.
Yeah.
If you want a set that's like perfectly matching stuff, there's a lot of the big box stores, Wally World and some of the others, go buy your knives there. You know what I mean? And I'm fine with that.
If you want it to look like it's built by a machine, because it was built by a machine.
Because it was. Yeah, exactly.
Buy that. But if it's built by hand, they're going to have some individual characteristics, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and usually, too, unless I'm doing something special, right, something like for testing or, I try to leave a forge mark somewhere visible.
Okay.
Okay, and sometimes more. Like I've done knives where where you leave all of the forge marks, hammer marks in it as part of the rustic appeal, And I like that kind of knife too. I like, and the reason is because I don't want to be associated with, just again grinding out knives.
Generics.
Yeah, just generics. I see guys forge their knives sometimes, and then they grind all the marks out, and it looks just like they just stock removal. They just ground it. Well, how do I know you forged it?
Yeah.
How do I know that this was a leaf spring, like you said, that was, half an inch thick or something? You forged it down to shape, and because you ground away all evidence to that fact. Maybe you just bought the knife blank, slapped some handles on it.
Yeah.
And so, and plus, I grew up in the Southwest, and one of the stories that with the Navajos with their blankets and pots is they always leave one thing, like one line not done right, like not completed, and because they don't want to be, it's a cultural thing, but I guess it's not to offend the gods, but they don't want to say to the gods that they're so arrogant that they're perfect.
Gotcha.
Right. So they leave one thing. And if my Navajo friends out there are listening to this, and you can correct me on that, but I just remember those stories. And so I want to leave, even if I'm hand sanding, I want to leave one little piece of evidence on there that this was not perfect. It was from a steel, and I did forge it.
Yeah.
Right? It was literally, it was in the fire. It was a leaf spring or a spring tooth harrow or something. And I do buy steel. I mean, I do buy brand new steel, but normally that's what I use with some of my chef's knives because I can't get that good of steel in, or I use it in my Damascus or my pattern welded steel. Yeah.
We see some of that same sentiment that you're describing in the early mountaineering. There are some places in Nepal along the Chinese border where the mountains themselves are gods. And in order to get permission to climb that thing, they said, we don't want you to summit it. You can get right next to the summit, but we don't want you to get to the top. And those early mountaineers showed that respect. And,
sure.
That's definitely a nod. That's definitely respect to do everything except for take those last few steps. I respect that a lot. I think that that's cool because nobody's out there saying, oh, you didn't summit it, you didn't achieve the thing. It's like, maybe you achieved even more.
Way more. Yeah. And two, every one of my knives, by my way of thinking, is completely unique.
Mm-hmm.
There's not another one in the world like it. Right. And that's what I tell the kids, because I have had, 40 or 50 kids here or people coming and taking classes. And if they're students or former students, I don't charge them. I'm just like, come on over. And my wife's like, you have to start charging. I'm like, no, I'm going to. I'm not going to do that.
You've made a big difference in some kids' lives by doing that. Like,
thank you.
There's kids that haven't really been able to sink their teeth into anything.
Yeah.
And then they come here and learn how to make a knife with you. And like, that's their thing. Like, that's the thing that really clicks for them.
Well, and my favorite thing ever about that is when they bring their dads.
Yeah.
Yeah. And and they don't have to, it depends on ages. I mean, I usually stop around 12. I don't want them too much younger than that. Although my neighbor boys, I've had them over to make knives, and stuff. And I let them choose what knife they want to make. I usually try to talk them out of like a 14-inch chopper or something like that. Like let's start out with something smaller that you'll actually use, but I want them to have those experiences. I mean, that's what they remember. And I remember when I was in junior high, one of my teachers, a math teacher, which math was not my subject. I'm just telling you, that's why I teach English and Spanish now and history too. But anyway, he took a group of kids out with him to run his trap line. Right. And he did that, 3 or 4 times. And I was so shy in school that I didn't approach him and didn't ask him to go. I just kind of sat in the back and I'm like, oh, I hope he picks me. But that's not how he rolled. I mean, for those kids who were interested, he would take them,
Right.
I mean, and I, looking back on that, I'm like, oh, I wish I'd had that experience, not that I'm a trapper and do anything with it, but I just remember that. And I'm thinking, okay, if I can provide those kind of experiences for those kids, they might remember that a long time from now,
So knowing that, do you look to those kids that are sitting in the back that might have their eyes on the floor and ask them, or do you still want them to come up to you?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
I'm usually, I feel like pretty approachable. I'm not the mean teacher yet.
Yeah.
I'm getting old now, so I'm
sure.
going to get
a couple more years.
Going to get crotchety. Sit on the porch and kick kids off my lawn. Drinking my lemonade with my shotgun or something. But no, I try to look for those kids, and I make sure that people know, like even in the classroom, they're like, well, wait till Rowley tells his stories, or wait till he's talking about knives. But I do that with a purpose. And the purpose is to make sure that all of them know that they're all invited.
Yeah.
And I've had, boys, girls, all ages from, like my neighbor boys are, I think, 1, 7, 8, on up to, later on in life. And some people have come over and just wanted to make one, and every one of them leaves with a piece, though, that is unique to them. No one else in the world has it. And they've had that experience too.
And it's something they can use.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's not like, okay, I got on the phone and I made a TikTok.
Right.
Which I do that too, because that's how cool I know. I'm kidding. I don't make TikToks. Okay. But no, they can take it home and honestly, some of them are good enough. Like they'll have it forever. They've used it in deer hunts and elk hunts and they'll probably, pass them on to their kids, or, it might end up in some drawer and somebody will be like, what is this stupid thing, when they pass on or whatever. But there is a chance that they'll be able to pass that down and that memory down. And especially with a dad and his boy, or dad and his daughter, and, or moms, I don't care if it's mom, but whoever comes over and has that experience together. And a lot of them bring their friends or their, siblings or cousins or something like that. Anyway, those are the best experiences. And I think, the more that we can have those, and the more they actually, like you say, work with their hands, because we're, as a society, are really moving away from that.
Well,
sort of.
There's a motto that's almost, I don't know, it's almost overused, but it's also not. And we came across it all the time in Marine Corps training, and that's, is iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another.
Sure.
And it's very true, and it's something worth thinking about a little bit. And that's exactly what you're talking about, is, one man sharpening another. Let's talk about sharpening a knife.
Okay. All right.
Because this is something that people fail at so much that some of the most common knives that we see in the outdoors have throwaway blades. Drives me crazy. Those things, very dangerous. They break all the time. And when they break, they're pretty springy and they come flying in some crazy direction that might include an eyeball or whatever else. I don't like them. They're crazy sharp. But the reason that people are going to these things, these throwaway blade knives, is because they don't know how to sharpen the knife that they have.
Right.
So let's talk about sharpening.
Well, I along those same lines with those knives that you're talking about, using the scalpel blades, and I mean, on the surface, the idea is fantastic, but just like in archery, when you break an archery point off, one of the blades off, one of the, whatever inside the elk, and you're reaching in there, it is literally very dangerous.
Yes.
You break one of those blades, they're flying around, or if you just leave it stuck in a piece of meat, you reach your arm in there and you end up cutting yourself badly because you don't know it's there, don't realize it.
I've done it. I've done it on animals that, one of my clients shot, and I recovered that broadhead. And then I'm just cutting away, and then I find another broadhead in that critter that's been in there from the previous season or earlier that year, and I cut the hell out of myself one time doing that.
Right. And not only do you have like issues of, infection and stuff like that, but if you're in there very far, and luckily we have, devices now, that satellite phones or whatever, that we can get help, but not too long ago that wasn't available.
Right.
If you're 10 miles in and you actually cut an artery or something, I mean, there's no help, and it's just you. And, as tough as I am, I could probably walk out on my hands, but, just kidding. I just lay down and call it good there. Cut my finger. Just leave me here. Yeah. But no, but as to sharpening, I think you're right, 100% with the fact that they're using these simply because either they don't want to go to the effort of sharpening, which doesn't take a lot of effort, or they don't know how.
Yeah.
And I get a lot of that too. How do you sharpen your knife? Because they just can't, right? I mean, or they were like me. They had the oil stone set that your dad had. It's all dished out, and stuff. And but I guess the keys to sharpening are just to make sure that you have a consistent angle on your sharpening. Now, most knives have some type of grind, and then they have a secondary bevel on them, which is the sharpened edge.
Yeah.
Other than the Scandi grinds, no, we're talking about the Mora knives. The Scandi grinds are just pure flat.
Yeah.
Okay. But other than that, most knives have that secondary bevel. So all you want to do is match up that secondary bevel. And now, if you mess that up a little bit, it's fine as long as you mess it up consistently.
Okay.
Right? Consistency is the key. You have to keep that angle.
So people obsess about whether it's a 20, a 25, a 27, a 30-degree edge.
Yeah.
But you can shave with a 33-degree edge. You can shave with a 17-degree edge. So you can get it very, very sharp. But you're talking about making sure that whatever angle you are using, that you're extremely consistent with that.
And they have, they have little guides you can put on the back of your knife, the spine of your knife. And that's fine. That works. What I would do is just use like quarters or nickels, whatever. So you want to lay your blade flat on your stone and lift it until the front edge contacts the stone. That's the angle you're going to use. And that's not too hard. But you have to sharpen that and keep that at the same angle. And that just takes some practice.
Yeah.
I remember though being, just as frustrated as anybody else when I would, before I was making knives and trying to sharpen on stones like we talked about, they're kind of dished out. Because it doesn't matter what angle you have then. If it's dished out, it's going to change as you sharpen,
right.
And so you have to have, a fairly decent stone, what have you. But once you get that edge, you can use, your knife steels. And all the knife steels are doing is pulling that burr on that edge back straight, lining everything back up. And that'll last a long time. Out in the field, I used to carry a little diamond grit, I can't,
just a sharpening
easy sharp
rod,
or whatever, sharpening rod, and just to touch it up, and you're just aligning that. But to get that initial edge, just stay consistent and run that across that stone, and you can either pull it away from you or push it away from you or pull it to you. It doesn't matter. There's some debate with that, but it really doesn't matter.
You can get sharp either way.
It's going to sharpen.
Yeah,
it's going to sharpen either way. It's just a matter of technique and what you prefer. Just be consistent with that. And once you get that burr, then you want to just very lightly run that across a piece of wood or something. It'll remove that burr, go to your next step stone. And then to get it really, and that's enough. Right. But to get it really sharp where you're talking, shaving your mustache and your back hair with it, then, which is the tough part, shaving back hair with a knife I've tried. You really need to have a strop.
Yep.
You've got to get that extra fine, stropping down.
Which is leather.
Which is your leather. Yeah. Some people use, you can use, if you're in a pinch, in a bind, you can use cardboard. Because it's got just enough abrasive in that cardboard with the glue and the wood fibers that you can use that as a strop too. You can use your pants, although use your pants, they're not really as tough as leather, so it'd take like 20 years or something.
Right.
But you're going to get it polished and sharp sooner or later, But yeah, that in a nutshell is sharpening. And really it just takes practice.
A lot of these factory edges, like on this Benchmade, you can see little tiny grooves from whatever they use. So it's like a micro serrated edge.
Sure.
And once that edge goes away and needs to be sharpened, you've really got quite a bit of work to start over at that point to polish all that off, right?
Yeah, and what happens is some of these steels, like you're talking let's say your Benchmade, and not necessarily this S30V, but some of the steels that are like up into like S90 and on will do better with a toothy edge.
Okay.
Okay, so that's why they sharpen. So you wouldn't want to strop, or you wouldn't want to go as fine on your stones. You want that little bit of toothy edge. Now these, I mean, you can sharpen these down to 1,000 grit, or I think I've got the 8,000 grit stones. Some of those, I mean, you can get your chef's knives and stuff so sharp. You just pull your tomatoes out of the fridge and they're sliced already. That's how sharp the knife is. But no, what you have to do, if you looked at this under the microscope, especially with right from the factory, you'll see those ridges, that almost serrated, that toothiness, because all they do is lock this blade in. It runs up into, some wheels or some sandpaper that's running, and grind it. I mean, it's like, that's all they do.
And I know in talking with Benchmade, because I do work with those guys in developing some knives a little bit, even though I don't know what I'm talking about. I use them a lot.
Sure.
So that's who I represent. It's like the user group who doesn't know what they're talking about. But I know that they put those edges on there different ways for different knives, for whether they want to cut on a push or cut on a pull.
Right. Right. Well, there's a whole theory of edge geometry. When I first got into knife making, I first started buying knives. I'm like, that's a knife. It looks cool, right? It's sharp. Yeah. Okay, good enough. Well, there's a difference then in, say, edge geometries. I've made my edges, my flat grinds, almost right to the edge. I mean, the secondary bevels are really fine.
Yeah.
Right. And my chef's knives, there is almost zero secondary bevel. I want those so thin that I can set a grape on a cutting board and just cut a slice that I could read the newspaper through without holding the grape.
Yeah.
I want it that sharp, right? I want zero work for the chef kind of thing. However, in that same vein, if I'm using that same knife and that same geometry, if I want something, say, that'll process a chicken, okay, and this is the same with your push and pull stroke, just how you cut, I want a thicker grind. I want that convex grind a little bit.
Yeah.
I want a less steep of an angle kind of thing. And these knives here, because you have a good combination, Benchmade, they make some really nice blades, but they have that super steel. It has a great you don't need it as thick to be as tough.
Right.
Right. So it can be thin and tough and sharp and all those things. It's knife making's come a long way in both design and material, because it all matters.
What's the future of knife making look like? Like, where does it go from here?
Lightsabers.
You think so?
No, I don't know. Honestly, like we were talking before, you were mentioning how things haven't really changed much. We look at blade designs, and other than like fantasy blades that kind of get way out there, everything stays the same. I mean, a knife is a tool, and it is one of the most basic tools. Now you can get out, into the fine down nitty gritty, but it really needs to do two things. It needs to cut and stab.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to change a design that's been really perfected over thousands of years. So as far as knife design or knives, I would think maybe different steels. I would guess from here they're going to use stuff that would not be, maybe not even have iron in it.
Right.
So some different, or maybe not, or maybe iron but not carbon, or that kind of thing.
Like more of a diamond or crystalline structure.
Yeah. And because each of these knives have that structure in it to some degree or other, the dendrites and when you quench, there's some things that are in there for, we're talking about the toothiness. Different metals have different crystal structures in the steel, I guess, that make for a different hardenability. So I can see that, but honestly, I don't see many changes. I don't, as far as like medical and stuff, then you get into the lasers and we're talking, I was joking about lightsabers, but that's where you do that. But like for everyday use and kitchen knives, and for us guys who are carrying pocket knives or whatever, honestly, I think knives within the next couple 100 years, we're not going to be able to carry them anyway, probably. You know, it's already going to that, you know, with the laws of can't have anything over 6 inches or 3 inches in whatever state. And, you know, you can't carry them on a plane, can't carry them into public buildings. You can't carry, you know, all this stuff. So, and a lot of people don't even use knives anymore.
Yeah.
Which is insane to me.
They don't have a task that requires it.
Yeah. Have they not read Louis L'Amour? I mean, I read Louis L'Amour, and he said, have a knife with you all the time. You'll never be without, you know. And
the times that somebody asks me for a knife and I don't have one, I feel like less of a man.
Yeah.
Like I just failed. I just completely failed. Okay. If somebody wants to order a knife from you, how do they do it? How do they get a hold of you?
The easiest way is just to go to my Instagram, which is mrowley2, ROWLEY2, or go to my Facebook page, which just look me up, and that's the easiest. I don't have a website yet. I'm kind of debating. I need one, but I'm out making knives instead of on the internet. I have a YouTube channel that I'm going to start developing. I have a few videos out, but mostly it's just me being silly, you know, testing out my samurai swords and playing Fruit Ninja or something. Not real good content. But yeah, hit me up on Instagram. That's usually the easiest way.
Okay. And if you guys need help with that, look in the show notes, podcast description, scroll down to the bottom of that, and there will be a hyperlink there. You can click on that and you can go straight to Mike's Instagram, and you can send him a picture of the knife that you want, or start up the conversation and get ordered whatever you want.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir, for your time. I cannot wait to get this hand axe in my hand and start chopping and cutting and doing all the things with it.
The only thing you have to promise, okay, is you won't cut your own fingers off by accident. Well, yeah, on accident.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And
I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
All right.
Yeah, I've definitely cut myself a large number of times. There's actually do you ever read Patrick McManus?
Yeah. I love that guy.
Oh, hilarious author. Yeah. Totally underrated. And for some reason, a lot of people haven't really heard of him anymore, which is a shame. But he has a short story about a kid's first knife. And the 3 things that he does with it, like whittles a stick, sharpens it, cuts himself, gets it taken away. And he said that the cut occurs between the first and second knuckle of the index finger of his offhand. And I have a scar from my first knife right there to that spot. And I'm reading this book and looking at this scar. And I'm like, I'm not alone.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is chicks dig scars.
Okay. Yeah. That's good. That's good news. All right, sir. Well, thank you again. And looking forward to seeing what you can cook up in your forge there.
You betcha. My pleasure.
I live in an old cabin with bad to non-existent insulation and wood heat. That cabin can see snow every month of the year and needs a good amount of firewood stacked in the woodshed to carry through the colder months. This spring, as my woodpile turned to smoke and ash, I noticed something metal pushing out of the decades of sawdust and bark. I kicked at it and unearthed a Stanley thermos. The cup was missing, and it showed more worn stainless steel than green. There were dents in the metal, and the handle looked like a puppy had chewed on it, but it still hadn't leaked the old coffee I could feel slosh inside. It took me back to memories of cutting firewood with my dad, waking up early for an elk hunt, or going out to the canyons to gather cattle. A Stanley thermos has the durability to survive whatever hard work you throw at it. You may find it carries memories as well as coffee. Learn more about their new and classic line of products at stanley1913.com or at your local sporting goods store. And catch you next week.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share the show with a friend. You can also rate the podcast and leave a review. Your support allows me to keep doing what I love, which is meeting incredible folks and sharing their stories with you. For more content and photos, follow the show on Instagram at 6 Ranch Podcast or me at 6 Ranch Outfitters. This episode was produced by Emily Brannigan, with original music written and performed by Justin Hay. Art for the 6 Ranch Podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Christofferson. Tune in every Monday for a brand new episode of the Six Ranch Podcast. I'll catch you next week.